his first day back to work. Officer Robert Johnson had been reassigned to a new police squad apartment. Robert was assigned alone to District 13, his new call sign, 1310. This city of 250,000 relied on just 15 officers patrolling at any given time. Such limited coverage demanded trust, loyalty, and unwavering support among the officers. Before roll call, Robert met his new squad. Among them was Officer Joe Wagner, an informal leader of the group who wasted no time sizing him up. Joe approached him with a hypothetical question. If a bad guy shoots an officer, then runs down an alley and you and I corner him, and I pull my gun and killed him, would you tell on me? Joe was testing him, trying to figure out what kind of cop Robert was and whether he could fit into the group. Robert's response was measured but firm. When that happens, we'll see. Joe smirked, unimpressed but intrigued. Robert's beat covered the city's north side, a picturesque area of rolling hills, grassy valleys, and lakefront properties. The upper-class neighborhoods here were dotted with gated communities, with homes ranging over $1 million. It was a quiet, wealthy area where alarms went off more than actual crimes occurred. Mid-shift, Robert was dispatched to a burglary alarm at one of these residences. Officer Wagner, assigned as his backup, arrived at the same time. "We'll split up," Robert said. "You check one side, I'll check the other." Both officers circled the house, reconvening at the back door a few minutes later. Nothing seemed out of place. "It's probably nothing," Joe said. Robert tested the back door's handle. It was unlocked. Drawing their handguns, they entered the kitchen cautiously. Robert called dispatch, requesting they be monitored on a secondary channel. Inside, the two officers split up. Robert searched the downstairs while Joe cleared the upper level. After 15 minutes, Joe radioed. "Upstairs is clear." "Meet me at the stairs," Robert replied. When they regrouped, neither had found any signs of a break-in. "Wind probably set off the alarm," Joe said. Robert agreed, but there was one problem. The back door had a deadbolt that could only be locked from the inside. Joe noticed his hesitation and laughed. "Just use the garage. Hit the button to close the door, then step over the beam as it lowers. Easy." "Fair enough," Robert replied. As they walked through the house to the garage, Joe abruptly stopped. "I need to take a dump." Robert frowned. "You can hold it until we're done and hit a gas station." Joe wasn't having it, running back into the house. "I'm using it here." Robert sighed. "I'm staying right here," he muttered, standing in the garage doorway. Under his breath, he added, "Such a swine." Minutes dragged by. Finally, Joe returned, zipping his pants and buckling his gun belt as he walked toward Robert, his expression defiant. Without saying a word, Robert stared at him, silently asking, "Really?" The two exited the house, got into their patrol cars, and left. Robert keyed the mic. 1310, dispatch. 1310, go ahead. Alarm not valid, door left open, no report. The call was cleared. 2 hours later, the squad car radio crackled to life. It was the patrol sergeant. When the sergeant's voice comes through, every officer within range listens. It's usually bad news for someone. 1310, the sergeant called. Robert answered immediately. 1310, go ahead. Switch to Channel D, the sergeant ordered. This was serious. Other police officers switched to that channel to eavesdrop. On Channel D, the sergeant spoke again. "Johnson, what happened at the burglar alarm at 1313 Lakeshore Drive?" Robert gave a summary. "We responded to the call. Joe and I arrived at the same time and checked the exterior of the house. We met at the back door, which was unlocked. We went inside to clear the house. Joe took upstairs and I cleared downstairs. Neither of us found signs of forced entry or anything disturbed. We secured the house, exited through the garage, and called dispatch to clear the alarm as not valid." The sergeant paused before responding. "The homeowner contacted me. He says someone's been in his house. There's evidence someone defecated in his guest bathroom, and he's working on a list of items missing from his guest room. I need you and Wagner in my office before the end of the shift. Turn in your keys and gear first. 10-4, Robert replied, his stomach sinking. Wagner, you got that? The sergeant asked. Joe's voice came through the radio. 10-4. The radio went silent, but Robert's temper flared.
Radio broke the silence. 1320, show me en route to the PD, I'll be 10-7. Officer Wagner had just informed dispatch he was out of service. The transmission snapped Robert back to reality. He needed to be at the sergeant's office with Joe. Without delay, he keyed the mic and called in. Dispatch, 1310. 1310, go ahead. Dispatch replied, show me 10-7, en route to the PD as well. 1320 and 1310, both 10-7, en route to the PD. Dispatch confirmed. Robert pulled into the back lot of the police department, where Joe's vehicle sat alone. As he parked, heat waves shimmered off the concrete, visible through the passenger side window. A few cars from the next shift were scattered between him and the building to his left. A group of officers, laughing and joking, exited the building, ready to start their shift. As he got out of his vehicle and retrieved some gear from the trunk, someone from the group behind him called out in a deep, mocking voice, "Oh, you're about to get a whipping from your daddy." Another chimed in, "You better know how to pucker your lips like this." Robert turned toward the voices, but saw only officers loading their equipment into their vehicles. It wasn't his imagination. Some faces he recognized, only those he put to memory. Robert walked through the side door into the dressing room, opened his locker, and placed his service belt inside. His handgun rested on the bench in front of him. Around him, officers were moving briskly, some coming from the showers, others grabbing gear from their lockers or heading to the equipment room. And Officer Thompson approached and opened the locker next to him. He looked at Robert with a raised brow. What the hell happened out there? Robert shrugged nonchalantly. I don't know. Without another word, Robert turned, slipped his handgun into the small of his back, and pushed past the others. In the equipment room, the sergeant and Joe stood near the key rack. The sergeant was bent over a roster, checking off items and validating the shift change. Robert quietly hung his vehicle keys in their designated spot and stepped aside, waiting for the crowd to thin. Glancing at the equipment room clock, he saw they had just 15 minutes left in the shift. As the last officer filed out, the sergeant gestured for Joe to close the door. "Lock it," he ordered without looking up. When the door clicked shut, Robert noticed faint smoke lingering in the air. Smoking inside the building was against regulations, but nobody questioned a sergeant. The air conditioning had pushed the smoke down, filling the small, cramped room. The sergeant finally raised his head, his expression dark and intimidating, like the devil rising from hell. "What happened at the burglary?" he demanded. "I need to know what to tell the complainant about his house being broken into. Either you two are incompetent, or the complainant's story is valid. If it's the former, expect write-ups." He fixed his glare on Robert. "Explain." He kept his response brief. "Joe and I arrived at the house. I checked one side. Joe took the other. We met at the back door. It was unlocked. We went inside. I cleared the bottom floor. Joe cleared the top. We met again, agreed there was no sign of forced entry, locked the back door, and exited through the garage. I closed the call as not valid. No report, back in service." Before he could continue, the sergeant cut him off. "The complainant says someone was in his guest room. There's evidence someone used the bathroom, and he's compiling a list of missing items from that room." Joe, without hesitation, blurted out, "Officer Johnson used the restroom in that man's house." For a moment, Robert froze. If he counter, it would be his word against the relationship Joe built with the sergeant over the years. His eyes flicked to the clock, 5 minutes past the hour. Robert looked the sergeant dead in the eye. "My shift is over," he said evenly. "If you need anything else, talk to Joe. I'll deal with the outcome tomorrow." Unlocking the door, Robert stepped out quickly. "Johnson, get back here and shut that door," the sergeant barked. "Wait a minute," he called back without stopping. "No, sir. My shift is over, and I know my rights. I'm going home." Robert moved through the hallway, then briskly crossed the now empty parking lot. His mind raced. "I just got in this squad, and now this." Robert had just stepped onto the public street when he heard someone calling after him. "Officer Johnson! Johnson!" Robert stopped and turned slowly. Joe and the sergeant were behind him, arms around each other, smiling. The sergeant called out, "You passed." Without a word, Robert turned back around and walked away into the darkness.